Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, taking some time out of your day. We'll get started in just a moment here. A couple housekeeping items. We will take questions. You can feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar system. I might wait till the end to take those, but feel free to type those in and we will certainly get to those. The session is also being recorded, so you can refer to it. Afterwards, APAL will have that posted on their website, and you guys will have access to it. So with that, let's get started. Welcome to today's presentation. It's on Civil 3D productivity tools for both civil design and survey. My name is Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Civil Product Manager at CTC Software. We work in close partnership with APAL to support and create these tools. So what we're talking about today is a set of productivity tools primarily from our CIM Project Suite. This is a suite of tools that works in Civil 3D, and they are a set of tools for everyday users in Civil 3D. A lot of what we do with this tool set, it's about automating tedious tasks. We're trying to take design workflows that you're used to and making them much more dynamic. And of course, we want this to work across all your different versions, whatever project version you might be in. And so there's compatibility with the 5 latest versions of Civil 3D all the time. And what I'm showing on the bottom there, in fact, is the ribbon that will install with the CIM Project Suite in your Civil 3D, like I said, in the 5 latest versions. And so what we're going to go through today are basically the tools on the left side of the ribbon. They're all design-oriented tools or help you in creating those drawings. And then a future webcast we have coming next week will be around plan production or sheet production tools, and that is a lot of the stuff you see on the right side of the ribbon. So just a brief overview of some of the tools, and then I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and show you how they work. There's a set of corridor and grading tools. First one is around dynamic grading with linked feature line sets. Feature lines are a nice tool in Civil 3D, yet they're pretty tedious. We have a rules-based design tool that allows you to link multiple feature line sets. Really powerful tool, totally revolutionizes grading in Civil 3D. We have a pair of tools that allow you to split or break apart or join corridors, something you can't do natively, something that would take you hours to do. We can do it very simply with this tool. A simple tool that allows you to auto-remove targets. This is often handy when you're trying to kind of rebuild a portion of your corridor or all of your corridor, and you want to just simply strip out all those targets. And one of our most popular tools in the corridor area is a dynamic target mapping, something that allows automatic assignment of targets into your corridor. So if you use corridors a lot and you know how tedious and time-consuming, not to mention error-prone, assigning all those targets can be, it's really easy with a tool we have called Corridor Mapper. So next set of tools is supporting the native pipe network tools in Civil 3D. These are a decent tool set, but they're really tedious. Generally, you'll find you end up doing all the editing one part at a time, yet you might have a pipe network with 50 parts in it. So with these supporting tools, we can design entire pipe runs through an Excel type interface, a really handy interface that allows you to push constant slopes or perhaps invert drops across structures, across multiple parts at once. We can swap multiple parts in planned and or profile view all at once. Normally that's a 1 part at a time kind of thing. Then we can also manage all the properties within our parts, in particular our structures, and assign properties in mass, like changing the reference alignment across all your structures at once, or perhaps assigning a casting to all your structures at once that meet that project requirement. And I'm also going to touch on some of our survey-related and some of the more generally used tools. One is a handy conversion tool that'll convert feature lines into alignments and profiles. This is really handy in surveying workflows where we take design grading objects like feature lines and then convert them into alignments and profiles so we can export for staking. We have a tool that helps work with survey databases to manage survey points and figures much more efficiently. If you have a need for working with different point files and specifically different point coding standards, oftentimes surveyors in the field are having to code in different fields or code sets. We can ensure that they work with one code set, and then you can make a translation before you import that into Civil 3D. So maybe you're converting from one numeric standard to an alpha standard, or from an alpha to a different alpha standard, depending on the coding standards you have to work on. And finally, a handy tool to help you track layers in use across all your Civil 3D styles. Often there's no way to, or not often, but there is no way to find out where layers are being used, and you end up with kind of bloated templates and wasting time trying to figure out where those layers are being used. So a handy tool there. So I'm going to kick things off in Civil 3D talking about these general and survey tools. I'm going to start with the feature line to alignment one. I've got a simple example here where I've got a parking lot graded out. Feature lines, very common use for this. Yet when it comes to staking this out in the field, what we often do is create Kogel points or something kind of tedious and inflexible in this way, because we can't get this feature line into our data collectors. Or maybe I've just taken a feature line and I need to, for design purposes, switch it from a feature line to an alignment and profile, because now I want to use a chord or something. There's often a reason to convert. And so with feature line to alignment, we can take a feature line like this, say our back a curve, and it launches a very simple interface. It's kind of like the polyline to alignment tool, but this one, of course, accounts for all your vertical design as well. So maybe this is our back of curve. Have all of our layer and style options available, and we're going to create a new profile here as well. We'll go ahead and draw this in a profile view right away, just so you can kind of see it. And that shows up right down here. So we get a native Civil 3D layout profile, and of course an alignment right here. I'm going to be manually tracing that stuff. Waste of time, very error prone. Next tool touches on survey databases, a simple little utility. And as I move along here, I want to point out one thing. You notice some of these buttons are light green up here and some are dark green. All the light green functions are free in this suite, and definitely free. The other ones come free, of course, with a trial, and then they're paid with standard licensing after that. So the second one, Survey Sweeper, this is a free one as well. If you use survey databases, you know how tedious and kind of clumsy they can be. They're great in that they generate automatic line work for you from your topo surveys. But what about when you do things like this? Like, what's real handy is to be able to fix coding mistakes in your survey codes. And so for example, I forgot a B code here. If I go ahead and update my line work like I want to do so that it now draws that back a curve geometry, that's real handy and everything. But what does it often do? It kind of screws up survey figures that I had previously fixed. We get duplicate ones like up here. I didn't have that before. Okay, I'm not going to get into the details of how survey databases work, but if you're familiar with them, you've certainly run into this problem. And the issue is that because we get our break lines from our survey databases, I can't simply delete these on the screen. I need to delete them out of the database. And it becomes a really painstaking process where we search through these long lists, these tables over here, and we're often doing this over and over where we end up duplicating survey figures. And so what we can do pretty simply with Survey Sweeper is that anything I want to delete from my database, my survey database, instead of browsing through that, I can pick it on the screen. So say both those survey figures need to be deleted. Here's another one where it duplicated, and maybe a couple of these survey points need to be deleted. Now, it's not just like AutoCAD where you can just delete it on the screen and you're done, right? Because this stuff is rooted in the database. And so we need to be able to dive into that database and remove that stuff out of there. So we can delete two survey points and survey figures. Again, they remove from the screen, but more importantly, they pull out of our database. So if you or any of your coworkers use survey databases on a routine basis, you know kind of how clumsy that can be. This would be a daily tool they would use, and it's free. Let's touch on another tool here. It's called Point File Converter. And what it allows you to do is convert between different survey code lists. I'd mentioned that in the intro here. So say I have a topo file like this with my northings and eastings and elevations, and then my coding over here. Now this is something that's typically unique from one organization to the next. You may have to code differently depending on who your client is. Instead of having your surveyors remember different code lists, what we can do is instead use a simple Excel file like this right here, and we can simply map one code list to another, okay? And then with our tool, we can have it look at this translation file, as I like to call it, and it'll translate any number of files like this. So let me show you how it works. If I come back here, right at the top, I browse to a translation file. That'll be this one on the right here. And this happens to be translating from a numeric to alpha standard, but it could be any standard. Then I browse to any number of point files I have. Then I can simply apply this. Okay, it's going to give me any kind of error messaging or reports on the results. But it, of course, also if I look in File Explorer here, here's that newly converted point file. And if I open this up side by side with the previous one, we'll get an idea what point file converter does. So it translated that entire column, really complex find and replacing basically, right? But these find and replaces are not one for one, they're fairly complex because why? We have prefixes and suffixes to account for feature code delimiters, all this kind of stuff. So dealing with multiple survey coding standards, really easy to handle with point file converter. Or perhaps you're an organization that gets surveyed from an outside firm, a different company, and they deliver perhaps in one coding standard, but you want to convert to another. A lot of people use this for that as well. All right, let's move on. By the way, that's a standalone tool. It can run outside of Civil 3D. It installs with a desktop icon right on your desktop, so you can run it there as well. One other little utility here, layer trace it's called. If I look at my layer list, we often have a pretty complex layer list. And where are these layers used? Well, we certainly draw objects on them, but they're also embedded across all of our Civil 3D styles, right? And when we're trying to perhaps understand where these layers are being used, or maybe just clean up a drawing or a template, we often can't delete these. And so wouldn't it be nice, instead of searching through all my styles over here, to be able to simply jump in here and, you know, there was that layer I just clicked on. It shows it's being referenced in all these different styles. I can grab all these styles at once, in fact, and swap these out to a different layer. And now that layer becomes free. And in fact, I can now delete it if I don't need that, right? And what are you normally doing? Again, you're searching through all these styles over here, digging in here, open up styles. Is it in there? Nope, not in there. And you can waste minutes, if not hours, doing that kind of stuff. So let's move on to some pipe tools. Pipe networks, I mentioned in the intro, they're a nice tool set. They're easy to work with. They're fairly intuitive. But everything we have to do with them is kind of on a one-by-one basis. Like if this is to be able to switch to a curb inlet or an inlet, and I have a bunch of other ones the same, I have to do this swap part one by one on all of these. Or maybe I have a whole set of pipes that need to change sizes. Again, it's one by one and it's only in plan view. So what I can instead do with this next tool is I can grab any number of structures or pipes. I can grab them in plan or profile like this. And I can launch Part Swapper. This is another one of the free tools. Then I can swap my entire selection at once. Again, normally it's one at a time. I could also choose the entire network if I wanted, or stick with that selection set. So here I come from this parts list, it'll grab, I can choose my replacement structure, my replacement pipe. Instead of a 1,000 millimeter one, switch that out, hit OK. I'll switch curb inlets, the pipe sizes, and so on, right? Really handy, really easy to work with. Another pipe tool called Pipe Designer. This is certainly one of our most popular tools. And you'll understand why in a moment. Designing with pipe networks is what, again, one at a time. And you're in your pipe properties or your structure properties, changing inverts, changing slopes, this kind of thing one at a time. But again, we often want to carry a constant slope or maybe a constant invert drop across structures. And as I'm going through and editing my pipe network, we end up oftentimes with kind of a mess like this. And so with Pipe Designer, I can choose an entire pipe run. I can do this in plan or profile. In this case, I'm going to choose a profile here. And then it loads that entire pipe run in whatever order I selected into here. So on the left here, we have the structures. And then on the right, we have pipes, kind of in this cascading view, structure, pipe, and so on. Really intuitive, easy to work with. And then from here, it's like an Excel spreadsheet. I can come in here and I can set a constant slope. Okay, maybe my invert drop, we need to set that accordingly. Now watch as I hit apply, all these pipes and structures will update at once for me. This starting structure is editable as well. The first one you pick so that the entire pipe run can be pushed down a fixed amount or brought back up. We can design by matching inverts or matching crowns or obverts. We can edit elevations instead. So when I was in edit slopes, you noticed I was changing the slopes and then the inverts were automatically updating. These are the calculated values in gray here. But I can switch that around so that I can edit the elevations and instead the slopes would be calculated. I've got mass pipe run editing options over here. For example, I could grab this structure 5 here. If I switch it to lock invert, it now switches sump with invert. And say this needed to drop down to 235. Maybe that was an existing structure. I'll go ahead and hit apply, and we'll see that reflected right here. Now let's say I want to interpolate between this structure and this structure's invert. What would that slope be, right? You just kind of guess at it normally. Well, what we can do here is come up and say from 1 to 5, let's interpolate between those parts, click interpolate slope, and then it calculates the slope across all those pipes and structures. Go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see this pipe run update accordingly. You'll notice some of these fields are highlighting red. That's because in the options I have turned on highlight rule violation. So based on the rules I have assigned in my parts, those violations will highlight here. There's an apply rules button up here. If I click this, it's going to read all the rules, including slopes, invert drops, across these structures and apply it accordingly. If you're using water main for, doing water main design with pipe networks, a pretty common practice. A lot of people not using pressure networks. You can now set the minimum cover in here for a more pressure-based design like water main. And that's really handy. You can set everything based on a fixed cover, and then you can go and say interpolate slope across a set of pipes where you want to hold that water main at a constant slope. A lot of options there. We can display invert, top of pipe, crown obvert, you name it. We have tons of options on displaying other properties here like descriptions, the station offset, the build. you name it, all of those properties we can turn on, and we can edit them here, like renumbering my structures or changing the description of them. I can do it in mass, all in Pipe Editor or Pipe Designer. So one other piping tool, Parts Tagger. This is about managing all those properties across your pipes and structures, especially your structures. There's all these fields in here. We use these to contribute to tables, right? Storm or inlet schedules like this over here. We export this stuff to Excel for reports. And a lot of these properties need to go with it, but editing this stuff or populating is often done one at a time. And when we want to do something like set the reference alignment and perhaps set the casting or the grate, why would I want to go in and do that? One at a time. So I can grab all these curb inlets and just did a select similar and then go to Parts Tagger. And I can set that grate. It depends on certainly your municipality, what standards you're dealing with, but I can set a grate or any of these other common fields that change from project to project. Surface adjustment value, reference alignment, let's go ahead and set that, and then a number of these other fields as well. So I'll hit OK. You're going to see it update, in fact, in this Civil 3D table over here. That's just a native Civil 3D table. But I'm showing that there so we can illustrate how quickly we can manage the metadata across all of our parts. And really this is, other than kind of the dynamic 3D nature of Civil 3D, this is the other big reason we use Civil 3D, right? It's the information in our designs, in our models, the I and BIM, if you will, right? Let's move on to some grading and core tools. This next tool is a fairly recent release, just a couple months ago, and it is quickly becoming one of our most popular tools in the suite. And by the way, when we release new tools, we release a new build for the entire suite. You simply grab that new build, install it, and you get any of the new tools. You don't have to get another installer for just that new tool, and we're releasing new tools and updates all the time, in fact. So AutoGrader is what this next tool is, and it's dealing with site grading, whether it's commercial like this, it could be more subdivision residential like this. Basically, all the grading scenarios you have that corridors don't work for. So let's start with a commercial site like this, and let me give an example how this works. Just a simple pond like this. Often we draw a base feature line like this, and then we start running stepped offsets. And then we grab all those feature lines and we put them in a surface, right? Then we go and edit them all one at a time, and it becomes this really clumsy process. So with AutoGrader, what we can do is we can create what we call grading families. And I've got a few created in here because this is kind of what your drawing might look like when you're using AutoGrader. And so if I go inside this grading family, what I've created are a number of what I call grading children. And each one of these represent a new feature line that'll automatically be created based on the parameters specified in here. And it even gives you a preview of what it's about to do. So all these grading children, so to speak, are based on parent feature lines. The parent feature line is one I selected based on a layer right here. And that happens to be just this one cyan feature line here. So we can obviously do many feature lines at once. And then I choose my anchor point for each of these child feature lines. I can even control the formatting of all of those child feature lines. What site do they go in? What layer? What styles applied? Okay, all of that can be controlled in here. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to click Run, and it's going to create those offsets for me automatically. Now these aren't proprietary objects; those are just standard feature lines, but we're automating the creation of them, and more importantly, it'll actually update for us as well. right? So this parent becomes like your baseline to your pond. And so that if you need some more capacity perhaps, and you're changing the shape of your pond, making it larger. Okay, normally you delete those feature lines and you'd run stepped offsets all again. I just simply come back to AutoGrader and I run this again, and it'll update all those feature lines. Notice it's putting all the feature lines into a surface as well. Normally that's a whole tedious process. All of that is taken care of for you. You can select your surface that it should be added to. You can even control the break line settings that are used, so you get the triangulation that you're after. What about curb grading or parking lot grading? This is often one of the most kind of tedious, clumsy parts of, not to mention difficult parts of grading out commercial sites in this way. We typically draw out in a horizontal fashion the outline of our curb lines, and then we move into vertical design, starting with typically one feature line, and then we then again run a bunch of stepped offsets. Well, think about what we did on this pond over here. Same kind of thing. I've got a pond family in here. If I open up this, I've spelled out simple offsets. And the method that I relate these child feature lines to the parent feature lines, we can choose from all sorts of different things. Distance at slope, relative elevation. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go ahead and run this curb grading family. You can see all these feature lines offsetting. Think about the time it takes you to do that, right? We just did that in about 4 seconds. That alone would take you at least, I don't know, 15 minutes, right? And then what happens when you need to change it, right? You got to redo everything. With this stuff, we can simply, if there's a change in the curb type, simply changing the size in here and running this again, or changing those parent feature lines in the case of what I did with the pond. Same difference. We simply run this, and all of those child feature lines will update to match the rules set forth in here or the new parent feature line elevations. It works in all different kinds of applications. Grading limits on the outside here. I can run this. It'll daylight to my existing ground. Okay. And so that's generating a daylight feature line for us. We're not using corridors. We're not using the grading tools or anything. This is functionality we built into here to generate stable and native feature lines. Let's take a look at a subdivision scenario. Oftentimes we're laying out the lots in this way, and then we move on to grading them, right? And so we wanted a way where we could take existing lot lines where I have the horizontal geometry, but then apply elevation points to them to match my grading. Now it depends on the area you're in. If there's a lot of terrain relief, certainly the grading might be different than in a drier, maybe flatter area. Certainly depends. But let me show you an example here. I'm going to take this subdivision grade existing family. And the difference with this family is, you notice in this column right here, this type, what I was doing before were parallel grading families. That's where it's offsetting parallel. But perpendicular is a different type. It's where we have a parent feature line like a right-of-way, and then we're grading perpendicular lines as opposed to parallel lines. So two different scenarios there. Now if I come in here, I've got a filter grabbing a layer that's referencing these red right-of-way lines. And then I've also got a filter for grading existing feature lines. These are the magenta colored lines out here that I want to grade that currently don't have any elevation points or anything. I need to spell out what I want this to do. So I can create some grading grade breakpoints here. This will be the house front, let's say. We'll go 10 meters at a 4%. And the house mid 5 meters down at a negative 10%. House back. Go a distance at a slope, and we'll go another 10 meters, say 5 meters, and negative 2%, okay? And then because I have my lot lines drawn, the back of these lots, these are controlled by, where it's tying into existing. So I'm not going to control that, but I want to insert grade breakpoints in the middle of these lot lines. Now, similar to the other grading families, I can control the layering and the styles and everything. I can save out of here. And then, of course, I can add this into a surface as well. So I'm going to click Run on this. And it did a lot of work for us. If I take a look at my feature lines, it inserted elevation points into every one of these feature lines. So if you're not familiar with how you'd normally perform this, right, you'd pick each feature line, you would insert an elevation point one at a time, insert its elevation, right? So we're managing hundreds and hundreds of elevation points at once. And again, it's all dynamic, which is what we want, right? So that if the design changes, for example, this was to go back 15 meters, can save that and run this family again. You'll see all those contours update once it runs through everything. And then, of course, if we look at some of these feature lines, we're pushing around those different grade breakpoints. Now, obviously, you're not going to have the same lot design across to your entire project. You might have a number of walkout lots, and then it switches to lookout lots, right? So all you simply do is you grab ones that you want to put or apply a different design to, put them on a different layer, okay? And then in AutoGrader, you simply create a different family. You can even copy this one. And what I would do is I'd come in here and I'd reference a different layer, right? So that type 2 of lot grading, okay? So lots of applications with AutoGrader. Again, probably one of our most popular tools. A lot of use coming out of it these days. So sticking with grading scenarios, we're going to move on to the final couple tools here. These are tools related to corridors. The first one I want to talk about is corridor splitter and corridor merger. And they do what they sound like, which is to take a corridor and to be able to split it in two or merge them together. And there's a lot of reasons you might split a corridor in two. The example I've got here is it has to be broken out for phasing purposes. You modeled it all together, but now quantities need to be separated from one phase to the next. Or maybe just the way you modeled the corridor, you need to change your approach to it and kind of have a primary and a secondary one. Any number of reasons. It's a very slow process. In fact, people don't normally do it. They end up just deleting your corridor and kind of rebuilding it, which is obviously a big waste of time. So corridor splitter, if I run this command and pick this corridor, and what it does is it gives me my entire corridor definition in terms of baselines and regions. And if this is your corridor, obviously you're familiar with what that looks like. And then I can come through here and I grab baselines or just individual regions even and put them in one column or the next. The two columns up here, these are the corridor names. You can double click on them and change the corridor name if you want to. All these phase 2 ones into the second corridor. I'll hit OK. Gives me a little confirmation of what it's about to do, how many baselines and regions in each corridor. And of course, I get now the single corridor here and a single corridor here. And if I look in Prospector, of course, we should see multiple corridors. We do. And it also manages my surfaces as well. Okay. Now the reverse of that corridor merger, like I said, I can choose any number of corridors. I'll grab these two right here that I just split. I'll put them back together. We'll delete the existing corridors. And then it finds the corridor surfaces that exist. We're just going to grab the one because they're both the same definition. We'll finish that and we'll merge those corridors together. Okay. Now all of that, right? We just split that corridor in two. Everything stays intact. Your frequency settings, your targets, right? If I look in here, all these targets are still intact. Okay, so all the fidelity within your corridors stay intact as you need to split or merge them. One more corridor tool I want to mention here. This deals with corridor targeting. And one of the things about corridor targeting, well, it's essential certainly to build any kind of corridor of any kind of detail, right? You've got varying slopes, varying widths across your roadway or railway or whatever it is you're designing. You spend a lot of time in this corridor mapping, target mapping window. You're coming in here and you're manually picking targets a lot. Maybe even you're trying to take advantage of this select by layer option. And what I always thought when I saw this was, well, I can select the layer, but it doesn't remember what the layer is, right? So that if I draw anything on that layer, I got to keep coming back here for each and every subassembly and tell it what targets it needs. So we wanted to totally change how that worked and provide a much more dynamic approach to corridor targeting. And so I've got a scenario here where I'm using just some native conditional subassemblies to be able to switch between standard curb and sidewalk and a drive over curb and a driveway. So pretty common in road reconstruction projects. And of course, with conditional subassemblies, what you simply do is draw these little polylines or pieces of or lines to represent where all those driveways are, assign the targets and so on, right? I've also got a number of offset alignments here representing parking lanes. Okay, so a pretty target intensive little sample of a piece of a project. And so what we can do instead with Corridor Mapper, I can come into here and I get all my target mapping options right in one interface, my surface, my width, my slope targets. I can come in here and I can choose the layer that should be assigned to it. And it's going to remember this layer, right? So I'm specifying settings that are going to be remembered for this corridor. I can even click this auto map layers and it's going to match up all the layers to the subassemblies that have the same name. Now, you don't have to have the matching names there, but it's kind of a handy feature. And it's even telling me how many targets I'm going to get as I select those layers. Now I'm going to hit OK to this. It's going to pull in 46 targets for me. I'm going to hit yes. It's going to rebuild the corridor and then all those targets come in. Okay. Now I've got some yellow hatching in my code set style to highlight those driveways coming in. Here's a cross section. In fact, right here you can see where it's modeling that driveway, a slice of that corridor there, and of course the widenings at the parking lanes. Now that layering that I have set in there, that stays intact, right? Those layers stay intact. And the point of that is that as things change, either your approach to corridor modeling, maybe the scope of the project changes, right? You never just build a corridor once all the way through and then you're done with it. You're always kind of massaging it and changing it as you move along. And with that, we'd of course have more target objects. And as we draw those, we'd think about what layer they go on and so forth. So you're already thinking about putting your targets on a certain layer. With this workflow, you simply draw the targets, you run auto map targets right here, grab the corridor, and then all those layer mappings, remember we had 46 targets before, now it finds 58, automatically pulls those in. I'll hit yes. And what we'll see then is, of course, all these driveways modeled up here, same as before. So it creates not just a dynamic target mapping for you, but it saves a ton of time because if you're anything like me, you end up spending a lot of time in here. And it's not just that it's time consuming, it's kind of error prone, right? You have all these different subassemblies, you gotta constantly keep them straight as you come back into here. With Corridor Mapper, you define those mappings one time, and you're off and running. So that's everything I wanted to show you guys today. Just a couple other things you might wonder about. How do you get this? This was a set of tools for Civil 3D users doing civil design and survey design, be it roadway, be it commercial, be it residential. There's tools in there for everyone. And it's available in the CIM Project Suite. You guys can download this from ctcsoftware.com. There are trials. Like I said, there is free tools in there, and then other ones free trial. If you go to our website, there's detailed videos and explanations of everything there. So go ahead and grab a trial there and try it out for yourself. So with that, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a good day.